Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
This is KRWG Public Media, TV, radio, online, news that matters. Now, across the Mesilla Valley and the Borderland, the stories that shape our community. From the KRWG Broadcast Center at New Mexico State University, this is Newsmakers.
Thank you for joining us for Newsmakers. I'm KC Counts. As the end of Title 42 nears, thousands of migrants have been living in dangerous conditions, waiting for their chance to make a claim for asylum in the United States. We'll hear from El Paso Times border reporter Lauren Villagran about her coverage over recent years and what we might expect after the end of the pandemic-era restrictions on asylum seekers. KRWG public media scholar Noah Raess examines the unique challenges faced by young migrant workers and how the College Assistance Migrant Program helps. Plus, El Paso voters will be deciding on Prop K and other ballot measures May 6th. Dominic Chacon of Sunrise El Paso will offer his organization's response to claims that the climate charter would destroy El Paso's economy. All that is ahead. Let's begin with Lauren Villagran. Welcome back to KRWG Public Media.
Thank you, Casey.
Great to see you here, and obviously a lot of territory to cover, considering your work, especially since the beginning of COVID-19 and Title 42, and now we are looking at the lifting of Title 42 on May 11th, correct?
That's right.
What do you expect will happen when that day comes?
Well, Casey, we've been in this position twice before already in which border authorities are preparing for the end of Title 42. Your viewers will remember that that is the expulsions policy that allows Border Patrol to quickly return migrants to Mexico or their home country. It was supposed to expire last April, again in November, December, and every time there's been some legal challenge that has prevented its lifting. Still, we are expecting that Title 42 authority to go away on May 11th. That's when the COVID-19 national emergency ends, and that's the, that's the doctrine on which Title 42 is pinned. And when that happens, border authorities are going to have to go back to enforce the Title 8 national immigration law.
Now, what about at the border in terms of just people and bodies? How will that look?
What does it mean? So Title 42 is something like a catch-22. You know, people have looked at it as a border enforcement tool. But I can tell you that covering the border for 20 years, it looks an awful lot like the border looked 20 years ago, when migrants they were largely economic migrants at the time, could cross the border up to 14 times before they would face any consequence. They were basically returned quickly to Mexico. At the time, it was mostly Mexican nationals crossing the border. Title 42 has been this authority that folks cross the border and they're almost immediately returned, right? Either directly to Juarez or to their countries of origin without any consequence, and also without the ability to seek asylum, which is what so many people are trying to do now. So when Title 42 ends, what happens? Honestly, it's anybody's guess, because people, traveling north to the U.S. border will react to any kind of enforcement measures. But I think you're going to see more people crossing between ports of entry, trying to turn themselves into Border Patrol. I think you're going to see continued use of the CBP One app, where people are trying to get appointments at ports of entry, but it's going to be big numbers.
Well, let's talk about that app, because it might remind one of the rollout of the healthcare website, right? Because people are really having a lot of trouble using it. Is it getting better? Is it going to be effective?
Yeah, it's oversubscribed. I mean, I think the Biden administration would, tout its effectiveness. They processed something like more than 20,000 appointments via the CBP One app. These are appointments for exceptions to Title 42, so that people can come into the country and seek asylum. Too many people are trying to access it every day, so it crashes and it doesn't work. And migrants who are fleeing persecution or are in situations, for example, in Ciudad Juarez, that are unsafe, are getting frustrated and they're crossing irregularly.
Yeah. Let's move on to the tragedy that occurred at the migrant detention center in Juarez. Obviously, there is growing frustration. There has been for a long time. How did that fire get started? Do we know more now than we did that day?
We do, and I had the opportunity to sit in on a couple of hearings in Ciudad Juarez in Mexican federal court for those who were accused actually of homicide in that fire. They include a Venezuelan migrant who's believed to have started the fire, but they also include 3 agents of Mexico's National Immigration Service, one of whom may have sold cigarettes and a lighter to the detained men. It was obviously a tragedy in which 40 people have died. There are still dozens recovering from smoke inhalation and burn injuries in Mexico. I think that people in Mexico are viewing it as a real breakdown of the system. Mexico is under enormous pressure to take a hard line against migrants. The mayor of Juarez has also taken a harsher line as his city has filled up with migrants from all across the region, the Western Hemisphere. And it's a situation in which there are growing tensions and not a lot of answers.
Indeed, and we have a lot of questions regarding what will happen on May 11th. But we look back to what has happened over history when we have these migration surges, and it just seems like maybe on different levels of government, we don't have the advanced planning in place. Do you believe that the Biden administration has done what it needs to do to get ready for a surge in migration at this point?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm qualified to answer whether they've done enough. I suppose we'll see what happens in the coming weeks. The Biden administration has certainly, taken a number of steps to open up what they call legal pathways. At the end of the day, though, what we've seen in recent history, the last 10 or 12 years, is that presidential administrations, both Democrat and Republican, are kind of throwing paint at the wall with what they can do within their executive leadership powers. Ultimately, the real responsibility for overhauling our nation's immigration system lies with Congress. Congress has not acted, as everyone knows. Really, since 1986, there was a small immigration reform in 1996, but even then you're talking more than 20 years ago. And the kind of people who are coming to the border, the demographics, the fact that we're increasingly seeing families, that we see children, that we're seeing people from all over the world, means that the answers of yesterday no longer apply. So, it really is incumbent, I think, on the American people, on Americans, to decide how important immigration and border enforcement are, and force, elected leaders to make laws to change our laws.
When you consider that no matter what we do, it won't change what's happening in places like Central America. Obviously, it's a very complex issue that just seems to be, keep on getting kicked down the road, and we really do absolutely need action. So let's talk about some actions that the city of El Paso has taken over time to address this issue, and what do they plan to do ahead of the lifting of Title 42?
Yeah, so the city of El Paso and El Paso County in the past year have taken an increasingly large role in supporting humanitarian efforts. Both the city and the county tend to view the issues at the border not as a border crisis, but as a humanitarian crisis. So, the city and the county have been working to ensure that once asylum seekers are processed by Border Patrol, again, they receive a background check before that they are released, with orders to appear before ICE eventually. So the city and the county are working to have plans in place to prevent a humanitarian crisis. When asylum seekers cross the border and they are processed by Border Patrol, they receive a background check and they are released. What the city and county don't want is people released to the street. They don't want to see families waiting for buses on street corners or sleeping out in the elements. So, El Paso has a robust, in conjunction with Las Cruces, a robust shelter network run through the Annunciation House. That's a nonprofit. And the city and county have bolstered efforts to create sort of a logistical hub where migrants who are released can have a waiting space and get buses or plane tickets out of town to their destinations. Typically, their destinations are not here in our borderland. They are headed, into the interior of the country. So El Paso and the county of El Paso are working towards that.
Sometimes they do want to go to New York City, and obviously that caused a lot of talk as migrants were being bussed out of different places in Texas and even Florida to places like Martha's Vineyard. And then we saw that many migrants were being bussed out of El Paso into big cities like New York and Chicago. Tell us, with the little bit of time we have left, about the work you did on a documentary telling that story.
Yeah, so last fall is when we saw, this busing effort at its height, and there were two parallel efforts. There was the effort by Texas Governor Greg Abbott, in which he was sort of shipping people out of the state. The county of El Paso was providing charter buses to New York and to Chicago based on where migrants said they wanted to go. We did follow a Venezuelan family on their journey across the border from Juarez to New York, and their sort of how they started their life in New York, and it was fascinating. I mean, they don't have an easy journey even once they've landed there.
All right, thank you very much. Lauren Villagran, reporter with the El Paso Times, focusing on immigration and border issues. It's been a pleasure to have you. Thank you.
Thank you, Casey.
Migrant workers face a unique set of struggles, especially those who start working at a very young age, who then find themselves with the opportunity to get a college education. KRWG public media scholar Noah Raess sheds some light on these struggles as he introduces us to the College Assistance Migrant Program on the campus of NMSU.
New Mexico is home to over 40 million acres of farmland, creating a large need for seasonal workers. These jobs are often challenging and can make going to college or assisting their children in college difficult. Martha Estrada with NMSU's College Assistant Migrant Program, or CAMP, says that they are here to help.
We provide students with academic, social, and financial support their first year of college. We also are very fortunate to be able to provide students assistance beyond their first year, thanks to funding that we receive by the state.
Nationwide, the CAMP program dates back to 1967 and was started as a part of the War on Poverty. As more funding started to enter the program, it grew across the country, with NMSU's camp opening in 2002. Soon after, Martha joined the team.
I was the first academic advisor the program had, and it was the best job I ever had, because I had the opportunity to serve students who, though I was never a farm worker student myself, I am first generation. I was the first in my entire, Mexican-American family to go to college.
Entering college can be a struggle for many students, but Martha says that for students with a similar background as her, this struggle can be amplified.
I, for example, loved exposing our students to something as simple as going to a play here on campus, or going to a lecture, or just walking over to like a poster session, or going to a dining etiquette workshop. I really enjoyed that as an advisor.
Martha says that her favorite part of her job is helping students succeed in college. One of these students in the program is Fatima Oliveros.
I started working in the field since I was little. In Mexico, I used to help only on vacations to my family. And then I started coming to Deming in the summer. I have done picked up chili, green and red. The last time I worked in the fields was my freshman year here in college.
Fatima has been working with camp since her junior year of high school. With their help, she is pursuing a degree in nursing and Spanish.
My parents were not going to be able to help me in any financial way because they live in Mexico. So I was basically going to be here by my own. So with camp, I found a way to get a little more money so I could pay my tuition and help me with rent, food.
Our students are salt of the earth.
Dr. Cynthia Bejarano is camp's principal investigator at NMSU, overseeing the program on a larger scale. She says that the students are what help make the program successful.
They have an excellent work ethic, and that helps get them across, through the finish line. We work with their parents very closely as well. So I think that also works to debunk the idea that once students start college, they're 100% on their own.
Seasonal workers face many unique challenges. Camp says that their goal is to help these students achieve their goals, ranging from art, like the artist behind this painting, to nursing, like Fatima. For KRWG Public Media, I'm Noah Raess.
Thanks to Noah for that report. On May 6th, El Paso voters will head to the polls to decide on 11 amendments to the Home Rule City Charter and select trustees for area school boards. While every ballot measure is important, the one that has stirred up the most controversy is Prop K, the Climate Charter Initiative, which, according to El Paso Matters, would establish a climate department, require climate-related job creation, mandate that the city use 100% renewable power by 2045, prevent El Paso Water from selling water to fossil fuel industry operations outside the city limits, and more. Voters have been inundated with messages from supporters and those opposed to the initiative. Sunrise El Paso's co-founder and organizer, Dominic Chacon, joins us to talk about Prop K, its origin, and its costs and potential benefits. Dominic, welcome to KRWG Public Media.
Thank you so much for having me.
Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about your background and the background of Sunrise El Paso?
For sure. I am a student of environmental science that went to the University of Texas at El Paso. I've been organizing here in El Paso, Texas for 13 years. And basically we're here because we are dealing with the climate catastrophe, climate crisis that we're in. We see wildfires every summer, we see storms, we see tornadoes, and Sunrise El Paso is an organization that was founded around 2018 in El Paso, Texas, that is youth-led, for the youth, by the youth, to address this crisis. We are the generation that is going to inherit this planet and disproportionately deal with the consequences or lack of decisions that we make during this time. And so we came together back in 2018 to oppose the sale of El Paso Electric, to oppose Newman 6 that was built in the northeast of El Paso, and now we're working with our community to pass the climate charter.
Now, where did you go for help when it came to creating that policy?
Sure. It didn't come out of nowhere. As I said, we've been fighting El Paso Electric since 2019 in their sale to JP Morgan Chase. So we've been working with communities since then and before that. We also worked against Newman 6, which is a fracked gas facility that El Paso Electric built after they made promises not to do that and to go for solar industry or solar production instead. And now we're working with communities all across El Paso. We worked with an organization called Ground Game Texas, which helped us provide legal aspects and legal framework for building the climate charter, and helped to work across the state to find cities and examples of policies, for example, in Austin, Houston, San Antonio, of municipalized energies, of climate departments. So it's been a really collaborative process, but led by Sunrise El Paso.
So you would like to see the utility municipalized, and that is what we're going for. And in this Prop K, it calls for a study of what that would mean, right?
Yes, exactly. Municipalization refers to a broad set of tools that the city has to take back ownership of the utility grid. So it could be 100%, it could be 50%, it could be 25%. But the feasibility study is about exploring what would be the best percentage for the city to take on so that it would be creating revenue and not being a tax burden on the citizens.
Let's talk about the Newman plant, because obviously not being able to supply that plant with water, right, being outside the city limits, what kind of issues will that create?
Well, in the climate charter, it's having us not create any new contracts to sell our water out to outside entities. But for Newman 6 and other facilities that already have contracts, it would not cancel the contract automatically. It would set forth the process by which City Council can determine how to go about either renewing the contract or renegotiating the contract. So those facilities will still be up and running for a long time. The climate charter simply sets a process in motion for us to reconsider these contracts.
How do you think that these changes might affect customers in New Mexico?
Well, New Mexico has already passed its own statewide goals to get to by 2045 to have 100% renewable energies. So we see this as something that's working together with New Mexicans. We worked specifically with the community in Chaparral, New Mexico, who were living in the front lines of Newman 6 and all the pollution that they create. And from what we understand from the community, there is no amount of money that's too much for their own health and the health of their children.
Let's talk about climate on a local level. I mean, obviously, El Pasoans have lived for a long time with less than clean air.
Absolutely.
We're running very, very low on water supplies. What do you see as the biggest emergency facing El Pasoans?
There's a lot of emergencies. The message I always carry is that a better world is possible. The solutions are there, but the biggest barrier we have to that are the fossil fuel industry. And the money that they have to spread misinformation, to muddy the waters, to hijack the conversation to be about something that it is. We've constantly bombarded with questions about how much is Prop K going to cost, how much is it going to pay. No other proposition has to answer that question. No other group has to go and confront that false information or that false conversation or narrative.
Well, certainly asking about the cost is on my list of questions today because we really don't necessarily have hard numbers to work with, and that's important to people as they go to the ballot box. You mentioned misinformation, so let's first talk a little bit about some of the claims that were made along the way that, for example, the Prop K climate charter would lead to the loss of, I think the number was 180,000 jobs, which is about half of El Paso's workforce.
Exactly.
Where can you say that we are in terms of real numbers on what this means?
Yeah, well, I think it's first to indicate that the way in which they are creating these numbers are fictional. They would be laughable if they weren't so egregious and unprincipled. We had a group of PhD energy experts coming from UT Austin who did a study just to expose how much bad faith was taken into that study. So for example, the way in which they calculate their job loss is by assuming that El Paso would not be able to fulfill any of its energy goals, and therefore all the lights to every business would shut out and all the jobs would go away. So those numbers, that's just not factual. We would not just disappear, or our energy grid would not just disappear. There would always be a way to create energy, whether it's sustainable or not. Another inaccuracy in that report was talking about the banning of gas stove and the electrification of all El Pasoans' appliances. That was so egregious that the city had to come out and take a stance against that. But those are just kinds of some of the ways in which they're guessing in their numbers and making assumptions that are just not based on anything that the climate charter is putting forward.
So the climate charter does call for some things that we know will cost money: establishing a department, studies, using solar power on city buildings. What can you tell us about what that plan costs?
Yes, there is going to be some cost to it. Mostly, the most immediate costs are going to be to hire a climate director and to create a climate department. But once we create those departments and those positions, we'll actually be able to tap into a lot more federal dollars, state grants, EPA grants that can really start to make sure that the cost is paid for by those funds and not the taxpayers. There is going to be a minimal investment, but even in the city study, they did not examine any of the benefits. So once we put solar panels on our own city infrastructure, we'll be able to save on our own electric bill and not having to pay the extremely high rates of El Paso Electric, but we'll also be able to generate revenue of electricity and potentially sell that back to school districts, hospitals, other public institutions that could benefit from lower costs.
You know, those public institutions are obviously deriving their money from taxpayers as well. What can you tell taxpayers in terms of what this might mean for their property taxes moving forward? Obviously, El Pasoans have been hit very hard by 3 new valuations in the last 3 years, and so those bills are rising rapidly.
Yeah, I would say that nowhere in the climate charter does it say that these need to be paid for by property taxes, right? Just because that's how the oligarchs in our community try to pay for their baseball stadiums and their other stadiums, that's not how we're going to pay for it. Studies have shown that this is actually an economic opportunity for El Paso, specifically because we are in the Sun City and we have such solar potential. So to those who are scared about the property taxes increasing, I say I understand. Even though I'm not a homeowner, I'm a renter, we bear that cost as well when property taxes rise, our rent increases, so we understand that burden that you're carrying. But this is actually an investment, and the return on investment is going to be really great for property taxes to create create revenue for the city to potentially lower property taxes.
You mentioned the gas stoves. You know, at some point, the directive is to end the use of fossil fuels, right? So at what point do people have to think about transitioning?
Well, the definitions within the Climate Charter are really clear that we're trying to ban fossil fuels specifically for electric generation. So you're not turning on your gas stove to produce electricity for your home. You're using it to cook your tortillas and cook your beans, right? You're not really using it to heat your home. So all those things are not considered for the Climate Charter at all. It's really about removing our dependence on fossil fuels for electric production. So gas stoves will not be touched, your gas cars will not be touched, all these other industries that do require fossil fuel will not be touched because they're not producing electricity.
What kind of chance do you think Prop K has on May 6th of passing?
I think it has great potential. The young people in El Paso understand that the world that they are given is not a fair one. They are trying to take responsibility over an issue that they have very little responsibility in the creation of. And so while we are up against a lot of big money and a lot of bad faith actors who would like to stop us from having this conversation and hijack the conversation to be about something that it's not, young El Pasoans of all ages actually are understanding just the tactics and the fear-mongering that is coming from these giant institutions. And so we have a chance to pass this, but no matter what, we are going to keep fighting. And we're going to keep fighting even if people do not understand, if they have succumbed to the misinformation. We understand that that's a tactic used to discourage us, and we are not going to be discouraged.
Where can El Pasoans learn just the facts about Prop K?
Yeah, for sure. Visit elpasoclimate.org or sunriseelpasotexas.org. We are local organizations. I know they like to say that Ground Game Texas is a bunch of outsiders, but I like to tell them El Paso is still part of Texas, and therefore we are in a coalition together with these people who understand that all the oil and gas that's being drilled in the Permian basins gets sent to Houston, gets sent to these coastal cities who also are dealing with the ramifications.
All right, Dominic Chacon, co-founder and organizer with Sunrise El Paso. Thanks so much for spending some time with us about Prop K.
Thank you so much for having me.
Good
Appreciate
to have
it.
you. We reached out to the El Paso Chamber of Commerce for comment, and here's what they had to say. President and CEO Andrea Hutchins provided a lengthy statement, and here's a portion of it. Quote, "The Chamber stands by the analysis we commissioned. While the newly released Ideasmiths report seems critical of Points Consulting, it does not offer an affirmative argument in favor of the Climate Charter and is based on faulty assumptions in its own right. We appreciate that an unnamed entity commissioned the report, but it is faulty, lacks data, and takes liberal interpretation of the Climate Charter at its onset, while faulting the Chamber for making assumptions based on the direct language of the 8-page charter. We have listed time and time again our opposition to the potential financial impacts on utilities and local businesses. While the new report seems cavalier that our concerns are exaggerated, I wonder if they would feel comfortable speaking directly to members whose livelihoods could be on the line. Until that kind of certainty, we feel comfortable in arguing against charter passage." End quote. You can view the full statement from Hutchins at KRWG.org. That's our time for now. Join us this week on KRWG Radio. Every weekday morning, it's Morning Edition from 5 a.m. to 9, Fresh Air at 11, followed by Here and Now from noon to 2, and All Things Considered 4 to 7 p.m. KRWG News is always online at krwg.org, and we'd like to hear from you. Email us with story ideas and video submissions. The address is feedback@nmsu.edu. For all of us at KRWG News, I'm KC Counts. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time on Newsmakers.